The objective today is to build an array to output predictable data. So the table of contents will go like this. First, we're going to talk about what an array is. Then we'll talk about data structures in general. So there's a spoiler alert for you. An array is a data structure. The third thing we'll do is utilize the concept of abstraction. So I'm going to show you how we are abstracting away some information using an array. Fourth up on our list is our good old friend, the console. So we're going to console.log some things. After that, I'm going to ask you to make some coding inferences. Big fancy word to make you feel real good and intelligent about yourself. And hopefully set you at ease, because coding's not too difficult. Not if you focus and persevere, it's not. And then I'll finish with an analogy before we actually start practicing creating arrays ourselves. So for an introduction here, this lesson introduces arrays as a means of storing lists of information within a program. And the class will begin by highlighting the difficulties that arise when trying to store lists of information in a variable. At the conclusion of this sequence, students build a simple app which can be used to store and cycle through a list of their favorite things. Some sort of list data structure is a component of almost all programming languages. And remember, we're using JavaScript in this class, so we're at a pretty high level there. And what this data structure does, this list data structure, is it allows large amounts of information to be easily referenced and passed around a program. And the use of a numeric index will allow us, the programmer, to access and display individual items inside of that list. That's why it gets its fancy name array instead of just a regular list, because of what we can do with it. People often don't number their grocery lists like in this picture. But if you did, that's where the word index would come into play here. You would be indexing that list, and then I could ask you what's on item number 4, and you should be able to jump right to that and know what's there. In the programming world, something like a contact list might come to mind. Is there anything else or any other type of list that comes to your mind when you're thinking about different applications or things on your phone or computer at home? Now, when you program a list or an array, at the low level, it is more likely that the items in this array are stored at many locations on your computer's hard drive. And the index is only useful to help the programmer identify different components or different values inside of that list. In this way, a JavaScript array is actually another example of abstraction. We know that it is holding a list of related information, but we don't need to think about the actual implementation details. We don't need to actually think about where every bit is stored on a hard drive or the RAM on its way to the processor. We don't have to think about that. We could just create an array like my favorite basketball players, and my first favorite basketball player is at the first index. So if I want to print that out, I could just type that instead of 0000F350 and hope that all these bytes here is the information that I'm hoping to print out. Though for the students in the class, they know that this is my favorite level to function at. So some things you should know before we start practicing. Arrays have many features which make them different from variables, but most of what you've learned about variables will also apply to arrays. And for example, just like a variable, arrays should be given a descriptive and meaningful name. My example just now was my favorite basketball player, so maybe naming that variable my player would work. You notice right there I just used the word variable to describe an array. Well, that's how arrays are created, using the word var. So there's another big similarity. And the last thing you should know before we begin is you're using that equal sign, but we're not calling it an equal sign in class, we're calling it a gets sign. So to start the array, you need to say like var, my favorite player, gets, and you type in this equal sign, gets, and then you'll initialize it with probably 0. Or maybe something that just logically would be inside of an array to start with. So here's our first exercise, super easy. We're going to use this console.log command. Remember how useful this is for debugging. Here's my example code here. So it says this array contains 3 values. There's the 3 integers. Notice that the values are separated with commas and that the entire array is enclosed in brackets. Not curly brackets and not parentheses, but brackets. So let's go do this. All you have to do is go to code.org and sign in. Then you should be able to click Create, go to App Lab. It'll give you a blank screen here, and now you may get started. So I'll type var myArray equals bracket 100 to 250 and 500. Put a bracket there, semicolon, and I'm done. Now console.log, show me what is in my array at the first position, and then run. The value of 100 is in the index 0. So notice I said first, but it's 0. That concept is called zero indexing. So that must mean 1, reset, run, is 250. That's the second thing. And so also try to have a little fun with this. Remember I said you can put text inside of this. So instead of numbers, let's go like var my teams equals bracket Jazz Nuggets. Make sure I did this correctly. So console.log my teams at the index 0, and there you have it, the Jazz. So you should be proud of yourself. You're creating arrays now. We're going to try to increase the complexity of your skills. And before I actually have you testing these commands out, I want you to make an inference. What do you think each of these things do? And then hopefully you have plenty of time in class to go ahead and type these up to begin experimenting with them. So I'll put them right here as comments, and then just experiment with them one by one. So if you're in my class, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sentences to help you out with your 9-sentence minimum. And for the rest of you out there online, I hope you're just seeing that hopefully coding's not that tough. You can look at commands like this and go ahead and make some pretty good guesses as to what they actually do. Let's say you don't know what one of these are and the teacher isn't explicitly telling you what each of them are. You can go ahead and jump to Google to find out. Usually if you type in the language and then the command, you'll find yourself on a Stack Overflow website. You might even find yourself on a website like this guy's. He does great explanations that are Eli 5, explain it to me like I'm 5. And to summarize this first part of what he's saying is basically what I was saying with the hardware example in those pictures, that data is stored in a lot of different ways. He uses this pretty cool analogy of how you can like store things in a room. And if I scroll down here, he says random access memory is a room that was designed specifically so people can enter and leave and be found in the quickest way possible. And so he goes on to make this great logical conclusion: because of this design, it is harder to build large rooms while still being fast. That's why we have this other type of storage. And you can think logically, some types of data, like movies, HD movies maybe, there's going to be a lot of it, and so thus it needs those larger rooms to fit into. Okay, so scroll all the way down. Okay, so right here he says when you create an array, a certain amount of seats are reserved so that only the person who owns the entire array, that is the series of seats, can use those seats. So you're taking a piece of memory here and reserving it for that type of data that you want to go inside of it. And then that way when you create a program, you can access the location of that data pretty quickly, or at least display it quickly, and thus having a happy customer or user of the program that you've created. So a great analogy he uses is that an array is like a couch. Okay, so enough theoretical stuff. Let's get busy. Go ahead and go to this link, and it's worth your time to go through each puzzle, but I'm going to give you a task that you can do without necessarily going through each step. No, I'm telling you, it's really good for you. Once there, the first step you'll take is you're going to use the set text command to set the main text area to show your first favorite thing. This goes back to some old coding we used to do. It's definitely not difficult. For you super advanced kiddos out there, challenge yourself. You want to use the set text and list.length command to set the text indicating what item of the list that the user is currently viewing. And everyone, don't forget that the way these work, these arrays, is they are 0 indexed. So whatever your first value is, to access it, you would need to type in a 0. And then the second item is a 1. And so on. So AppLab here has great instructions, exactly what I just told you to do. Those instructions are here, so you can go ahead and start dropping in some code and getting things to work. Once you're done with each one of these mini directions, I want you to go ahead and meet me back right here. So now that those exercises are done, to summarize what you did is you created this app that allows a user to scroll through individual items in an array, and in order to keep track of which index we are currently viewing, our application needed this global variable to store the current index. Now in coming exercises, we'll want our global index to change, so let's make sure that your code references your global index rather than these fixed values. Let's say you struggled with those step-by-step instructions code.org gave you. I'm going to go ahead and walk you through my own little project. I want you to code up your own app that's similar to this favorite things concept, but different. For example, I thought up this idea to make an NFL winners-losers app to display who won or lost given a specific week in the NFL season. And then to add complexity, I could add a feature where you can guess who you think won, and then you get a certain percentage back. See, there's the math part of programming. You can see how many times you correctly predicted who would win in each week, thus sort of making a pretty fun game out of this app. And you can see in real life, some people have taken this idea and made a lot of money off of it. So if you're sitting here right now thinking, how does this exercise have real-world applications? Well, there's your example. So good news, bad news. I had some great takeaways from this practice. The bad news is, when I went to make this video, all my code was erased, and I had to create this example for you all from the beginning. And because I already made this particular slide where I had reflected and said if I had to do it all over again, what kind of app would I make? I went ahead and really did it over again, but instead of using this Justices of the Supreme Court idea, I'm playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey right now, so I created a little philosopher app. I'll show you what I mean in a minute, but let me go over my 3 big ahas from the NFL app I made. The first aha moment was that I kept forgetting that everything starts at 0, and then that was the key for me to get things to work successfully. Also, when I was struggling, I just went to the Bubble 29 on Unit 5 Arrays lesson to help me out. And near the end of the app, I was banging my head on the desk just trying to figure out what I did wrong. And in the end, it was just because I did not initialize a value for my array. So you have to have something in there in the very beginning. Even if you're not going to keep it, it has to be in there. So here's my great creation. If you're in my class, I'll go ahead and paste all this code onto Canvas, but if you're not and you want to use this code to help you out, you'll need to pause here. Maybe in the comments in YouTube I can actually paste this, that'd be a good idea. But it's also good for your fingers to get used to typing this stuff out. Not only will it create muscle memory for you, but I really think there's no other way to learn coding than to actually code. And if you're at the step where you just don't know anything, then it's still worth your time to go ahead and type out this, even if it's painstakingly long. So what does this app do? Well, let's go ahead and run. So if I click here, type in 1 and add that, and I'll click here and type in 2 and add. I can't just click 3, so I have to click the box again, and there's my number 3. I'll add that. What happens now is I can go down here and click last, and last again, and so it'll show me what I had put in there. The goal of this app is actually for you to look at the philosophers here and type their names in. So our first guy here is Plato, so I'll add him. And then Aristotle is next to him. I misspelled and I did not code in a feature so I can delete that or fix that spelling, so I have to keep moving on. You have Pythagoras. Hope that's not misspelled. It's also too long, but I think you get the point, right? So let me narrate this code to you and then let you build your own. Basically, I started with an array called Athens, so var Athens, and I threw an initial value there just to get things going. I gave myself some notes here. It's always good to comment. And then I went over here and created a variable called others, as in the other philosophers I'll be putting here, and I initialize that with a 0. So as many times as I add items into this array, that others value will be different. Here I have Plato at the 0 index. If I added another one just to start things off, like Archimedes, if I'm going to print out this name, Archimedes, I would have a value of a 1 under the others variable. So next comes my event handler. So what I'm saying is when you click the add button, what's going to happen is whatever's in here, this thing is called the input, whatever's there is going to be inserted into the array called Athens. And then the number associated with that will be in the variable others. After I've clicked that button, I need to set the text of this big area called text area 1 to that thing that I just typed in. So this is a parameter, a value inside of a parameter, and this is where coding gets complicated. So to figure out what's in my array here, I would need a command like set text or console.log, and then I would put this to see what that value is. The other thing I needed to do is set the text of this box back to nothing. See, it's blank right there. So that was just a really simple command. And now that I've inserted this item, I have to take the variable others and add a 1 to it because something was just added. So some neat, tidy code right there that should logically take you through the steps of clicking the add button. I think I'll let you read the rest of this on your own, and if you have any questions, you can ask me in class. But let's wrap up this lesson by doing one last check for understanding of what the purpose of arrays are, and then I'll give you your DOL. So I want you to think about this. For each type of information below here, decide whether you would use just a variable or an actual array to store the data. So the first example is all the messages a user has sent. Would this be a variable or an array? The second one is the highest score a user has ever reached on an app. And the last one, a username and password to unlock an app. So some just comforting thoughts as we finish here. Remember, I created this one app, the NFL example, and it was totally lost, but then I just took an optimistic approach to it. I felt great about losing it and thought to myself, now I can practice speed coding, so see how fast I could whip up something that I've already done. The truth is it still wasn't as fast as I'd like it. I suppose that would just take practice. But here all that code is, and so I want you to finish this lesson with this question. Let's say you want to alter the code so it outputs your favorite number instead of like either your favorite thing or your favorite philosopher or whatever. So looking at all those lines of code, which lines specifically would you need to change so it outputs that number? Don't overthink this. It's actually a very easy question. And I think the answer gives you insight into the world programmers live in. And why, for you to be a successful programmer, all you really need to do is know how to read code. You absolutely don't need to know how to write code.